You shouldn't be watching this.
The Hartwell House. I need to tell you about what happened to me 3 months ago. I've been going back and forth about sharing this, but I can't keep it to myself anymore. My therapist says talking about it might help, but honestly, I think some of you might not believe me. That's okay. I wouldn't believe me either if I hadn't lived through it. My name is Sarah, and I'm a college student at State University. To pay for tuition and rent, I babysit for families around town. It's decent money, especially for weekend nights when parents want date nights. I've been doing it for 2 years now, and I've never had any real problems. Kids can be difficult, sure, but nothing I couldn't handle. That changed the night I worked for the Hartwells. I found the job posting on the university's babysitting board in early October. Reliable babysitter needed for 6-year-old daughter. Friday nights, 7 p.m. to midnight. $20 an hour, must have references. $20 an hour was more than I usually made, so I called immediately. Mrs. Hartwell answered on the second ring. Her voice was soft, almost whispery. "Thank you so much for calling," she said. "We're actually quite desperate. Our regular sitter well, she's no longer available." I gave her my references and she called me back within an hour. "When can you start?" she asked. "This Friday?" The house was in Maplewood Heights, one of the older neighborhoods about 15 minutes from campus. These weren't mansions, but they were the kind of solid 2-story homes that had been built in the 1950s for growing families. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, the kind of place where kids still rode bikes and neighbors knew each other's names. I pulled into the driveway at 6:55 p.m. that Friday, right on time. The Hartwell House was painted a pale yellow with dark green shutters. Nothing unusual about it, except I don't know how to explain this without sounding crazy, but the house felt heavy, like the air around it was thicker somehow. Mr. Hartwell answered the door. He was tall and thin, probably in his late 30s with prematurely gray hair and tired eyes. "Sarah? Come in, come in. Linda's just finishing up with Emma." The inside of the house was immaculate. Hardwood floors that gleamed under the chandelier light, family photos lining the hallway, the kind of decor you'd see at a home magazine. But it was cold. Not temperature-wise, the heat was running, but it felt cold. Mrs. Hartwell came down the stairs, and I understood immediately why her voice had sounded so soft on the phone. She was tiny, maybe 5'2", with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun. She moved carefully, like she was afraid of making too much noise. "Sarah, thank you for coming," she said, barely above a whisper. "Emma's in the living room, watching TV. She's already had dinner." They gave me the standard rundown. Bedtime at 8:30, no sugar after 7 p.m., emergency numbers on the fridge. Mrs. Hartwell handed me a piece of paper with their cell numbers and the number for Emma's pediatrician. "One more thing," Mr. Hartwell said as they were putting on their coats. "If Emma asks to go upstairs after 8 p.m., just tell her no. She has everything she needs downstairs." I nodded. Parents often had specific rules about where kids could go in the house. "No problem. And Sarah?" Mrs. Hartwell's voice was even softer now. "If you hear anything from upstairs after we leave, just ignore it. Old houses make noises." They left at 7:15, and I went to meet Emma. She was curled up on the couch watching cartoons, a small girl with dark hair and her father's tired eyes. She looked up when I walked in and gave me a shy wave. "Hi, Emma. I'm Sarah. I'm going to hang out with you tonight while your parents are at dinner." "Okay," she said, turning back to the TV. "Do you want to watch Bluey with me?" For the next hour, everything was normal. We watched TV, played with her stuffed animals, and she told me about her first-grade teacher and how she was learning to read chapter books. Emma was sweet and well-behaved, the kind of kid who made babysitting easy. At 8:25, I told her it was time to get ready for bed. She nodded and started gathering her toys. "Can I go upstairs to brush my teeth?" she asked. "Your parents said you have everything you need down here. I replied. "Where's your toothbrush?" She pointed to a small bathroom off the kitchen. "Mom made me keep it down here now." Now, that struck me as odd. Why would parents make their 6-year-old brush her teeth in the kitchen bathroom instead of the upstairs bathroom? But families have their routines, and it wasn't my place to question them. After she brushed her teeth, I tucked her into a small bed that had been set up in what looked like a converted study off the living room. Another odd choice. Most kids have their bedrooms upstairs, but Emma didn't seem bothered by it. "Sarah," she said as I was turning off the lamp, "do you hear the lady upstairs?" My hand froze on the light switch. "What lady, honey?" "The lady who walks around at night? Mom and Dad say I'm not supposed to talk about her." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept my voice steady. "Emma, there's no one upstairs. It's just us in the house. But I can hear her walking sometimes, and she talks to herself." I sat back down on the edge of her bed. "What does she say?" Emma looked toward the ceiling, then back at me. "I can't understand her. It sounds like she's sad." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Try to get some sleep, okay? I'll be right in the living room if you need anything." She nodded and closed her eyes. Within 10 minutes, she was breathing deeply, fast asleep. I went back to the living room and settled on the couch with my textbook. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the heating system. I tried to focus on my reading, but Emma's words kept echoing in my head. "The lady who walks around at night." At 9:30, I heard the first footstep. It was soft, just a gentle thud from somewhere above my head. I looked up at the ceiling, listening. Nothing. I went back to my book. 5 minutes later, another footstep. Then another. Someone was walking around upstairs. My heart started beating faster. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell were at dinner. They had texted me when they arrived at the restaurant. Emma was asleep in the study. So who was walking around upstairs? I got up and checked the front door. Locked. I checked the back door. Also locked. I looked out the windows. No cars in the driveway except mine. "Old houses make noises," Mrs. Hartwell had said. Maybe the house was just settling. I sat back down and tried to convince myself that's all it was. But the footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth across the ceiling above the living room. At 10:15, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Crying. Someone upstairs was crying, soft, heartbroken sobs that seemed to seep through the floorboards. I grabbed my phone and stood up, my hands shaking. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That I heard crying in a house where no one was supposed to be? They'd think I was crazy. I walked to the bottom of the staircase and looked up. The second floor was dark, but I could see the outline of a hallway stretching back into shadow. The crying was clearer now, definitely a woman, and she sounded absolutely devastated. "Hello?" I called softly. "Is someone up there?" The crying stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the crying. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute, straining to hear any sound from upstairs. Then, very slowly, footsteps began moving toward the top of the staircase. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The footsteps stopped at what I assumed was the top of the staircase, directly above where I was standing. I couldn't see anyone. The upstairs hallway was too dark. But I could feel eyes on me, watching me from the shadows. "Who's there?" I whispered. No answer. But the temperature in the house seemed to drop 10 degrees in an instant. My breath came out in little puffs, and I could see goosebumps rising on my arms. I grabbed my phone and called Mrs. Hartwell. It went straight to voicemail. I tried Mr. Hartwell. Same thing. The footsteps started moving again, pacing back and forth at the top of the stairs. Back and forth, like someone trying to decide whether to come down. I checked on Emma, still fast asleep, thank God. I closed the study door quietly and went back to the living room. By 11 p.m., I was seriously considering just taking Emma and leaving. I could drive her to the restaurant where her parents were having dinner, but what if I was wrong? What if it really was just house noises and I was being paranoid? I'd lose the job and probably my reputation as a reliable babysitter. But then I heard the voice. Where is she? It was faint, coming from upstairs, but unmistakably the voice of a woman. She sounded frantic, desperate. Where is my little girl? I felt ice water run through my veins. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I tried calling the Hartwells again. No answer. The voice came again, louder this time. I can't find her. Where did she go? And then, clear as day, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming down. I ran to the study and quietly opened the door. Emma was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah, she whispered, she's coming down the stairs. I closed the door and locked it, then pulled Emma against me. It's okay, I whispered, though nothing felt okay. Just stay quiet. The footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. I could hear them in the hallway, slow and deliberate, moving toward the living room. Where is she? The voice called out. I know she's here somewhere. Emma buried her face against my shoulder. She's looking for me, she whispered. She's always looking for me. I held Emma tighter and tried to think. The front door was in the living room, and whoever was out there was between us and the exit. The back door was through the kitchen, but we'd have to cross the hallway to get there. The footsteps moved into the living room, and I heard furniture being moved around. Couch cushions being lifted, the coffee table being shifted. Where are you, sweetheart? The voice called out. Mommy's looking for you. But Emma's mother was Linda Hartwell, and she was at dinner across town. So who was this woman calling herself Emma's mommy? The footsteps moved toward the kitchen, and I made a decision. I picked up Emma and quietly unlocked the study door. If we could get to the back door while the woman was in the kitchen, we might make it outside. We made it 3 steps into the hallway before the woman spoke directly behind us. There you are. I spun around, still holding Emma, and saw nothing. The hallway was empty, but I could feel her presence, cold and overwhelming, like standing in a walk-in freezer. Run, Emma whispered. Run, Sarah. I ran. I bolted for the back door, Emma clinging to me, and fumbled with the lock. Behind us, I could hear the woman following, her footsteps rapid and angry. Come back here, she screamed. You can't take her from me. I got the door open and ran outside into the cold October night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, where I fumbled with the keys while Emma climbed into the passenger seat. As I started the engine, I looked back at the house. In the upstairs window, I could see the silhouette of a woman standing perfectly still, watching us. I drove straight to the restaurant and found the Hartwells at their table. They took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. We need to go, I said. Now. Mr. Hartwell paid the check, while Mrs. Hartwell took Emma to the bathroom. When they came back, Mrs. Hartwell's face was white as paper. What did Emma tell you? She asked. She said there was a lady upstairs looking for her. Mr. Hartwell closed his eyes. We should have told you. On the drive back to their house, they explained everything. The previous owner of the house had been a woman named Margaret Chen. She'd lived there with her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. One night in March, there had been a house fire. Margaret had died trying to save her daughter, but she'd been too late. Lily had already succumbed to smoke inhalation. The fire was 3 years ago, Mrs. Hartwell said quietly. We bought the house last year because the price was so good. We thought it was just stories. But Emma started having nightmares as soon as we moved in, Mr. Hartwell continued. She said there was a lady in her room at night looking for her little girl. The lady thought Emma was Lily. That's why Emma slept downstairs now. That's why she couldn't go upstairs after 8 p.m. That's why their regular babysitter was no longer available. Margaret doesn't understand that her daughter is gone, Mrs. Hartwell whispered. She keeps looking for her. And Emma looks so much like Lily did. When we got back to the house, the Hartwells went upstairs to check on things while I waited in the car with Emma. They came back down 5 minutes later, both pale and shaken. She's gone, Mr. Hartwell said. Whatever you did, she's gone. But I could see in their eyes that they knew it was temporary. Margaret would be back. She always came back. The Hartwells paid me for the full evening and gave me an extra $100 for what I'd been through. They apologized over and over, but I could see they were relieved that someone finally believed them. I never babysat for them again. 2 weeks later, I saw a for sale sign in their yard. Mrs.
Hartwell texted me that they'd decided to move closer to her parents in Colorado. Emma needs a fresh start, she wrote. We all do. I drove by the house one more time before they left. It was during the day, bright and sunny, but I still felt that same heaviness in the air. As I sat in my car, looking at the yellow house with the dark green shutters, I saw something that made my breath catch. In the upstairs window, just for a moment, I could swear I saw the silhouette of a woman standing perfectly still looking, still waiting, still searching for her little girl. The house has been empty for 2 months now. The for sale sign is still up, though I noticed it's been moved to different parts of the yard several times. I heard from a friend who works at a real estate office that they've had 3 different families make offers, but all of them have backed out after spending a night in the house. Sometimes I drive by late at night, and I can see a light in one of the upstairs windows. The electricity was supposed to be turned off weeks ago. I still babysit for other families around town, but I'm more careful now about the jobs I take. I ask more questions. I pay attention to the things parents don't say as much as the things they do. And I never, ever ignore it when a child tells me there's someone in the house who shouldn't be there, because sometimes the person who's really lost isn't the living. Sometimes it's the dead who can't find their way home. If you're ever offered a babysitting job that pays more than usual, ask yourself why. If the parents seem desperate, if they can't keep a regular sitter, if they have strange rules about where the child can go in their own house, just walk away. Some jobs aren't worth the money, and some houses should just be left alone.
The Whitmore House. I never thought a house-sitting job would change my life forever. But here I am 6 months later, still jumping at every creak in my apartment, still checking locks twice before bed. Some experiences leave marks on you that never fully fade. This happened last October. I was 24, fresh out of college and desperately broke. Student loans were crushing me and my part-time job at a coffee shop barely covered rent. So when I saw a Craigslist ad for a house-sitting gig that paid $800 for just 1 week, I jumped on it immediately. The ad was simple: responsible house sitter needed. beautiful historic home in Millbrook Heights. Light maintenance, plan watering, mail collection. Must be comfortable staying alone. References required. $800 for 7 days. Millbrook Heights was the fancy part of town. Old money, massive houses, the kind of neighborhood where people drove BMWs to get their mail. $800 for a week of what essentially amounted to a free vacation in a mansion? It seemed too good to be true. I should have trusted that instinct. The homeowner, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, was in her 70s and spoke with the refined accent of someone who'd never had to check her bank balance. We met at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral ground, she said, for our interview. She was immaculately dressed, pearl necklace and all, but there was something brittle about her composure. Her hands shook slightly when she lifted her teacup, and she kept glancing toward the windows like she was expecting someone. "The house has been in my family for generations," she explained, sliding a brass key across the table. "Built in 1894. It's substantial. Some people find it overwhelming." I assured her I was comfortable with old houses. My grandmother had lived in a Victorian, and I'd spent summers there as a kid. Mrs. Whitmore seemed relieved by this. "There are just a few simple rules," she continued, pulling out a handwritten list. "Water the plants daily. There's a schedule on the refrigerator. Collect the mail. Don't answer the door unless you're expecting someone. Deliveries are held at the post office while I'm away. And please don't go into the basement. It's not safe. Old foundation, you understand." The basement restriction seemed reasonable. Old houses had old problems. "Oh, and one more thing," she said, almost as an afterthought. "If you hear the piano playing, just ignore it." Old houses settle in strange ways. The strings vibrate sometimes. I nodded, though that seemed like an odd detail to mention, but $800 was $800. The Whitmore House sat on 3 acres at the end of Elm Street, surrounded by towering oak trees that cast long shadows across the lawn. It was a Gothic revival masterpiece, 3 stories of dark stone and pointed arches with a wraparound porch and bay windows that caught the afternoon light. Beautiful, but imposing. The kind of house that looked like it had stories to tell. Mrs. Whitmore gave me a quick tour on Sunday evening before her flight. The interior was exactly what you'd expect. Antique furniture, oil paintings in heavy frames, Persian rugs worn soft by decades of footsteps. The ceilings were high, the rooms spacious, and everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books. "The plants are my pride and joy," she said, leading me through a sunroom filled with orchids and ferns. "This schedule tells you exactly when and how much to water each one. Please follow it precisely." She showed me the master bedroom where I'd be staying, the kitchen stocked with enough food for a week, and the living room with its grand piano, a beautiful old Steinway that dominated the space. "Do you play?" she asked, noticing my admiration. "A little. My mom made me take lessons as a kid." Something flickered across her face. Was it concern? But she just nodded and continued the tour. The basement door was in the kitchen, painted white and secured with a heavy deadbolt. Mrs. Whitmore didn't even pause as we passed it. "Remember," she said as we finished the tour, "no visitors, no basement. Follow the plant schedule and don't worry about any unusual sounds. Old houses make noise." She left for the airport an hour later, and I was alone in the Whitmore house. The first night was actually pleasant. I made myself dinner, watched Netflix in the living room, and fell asleep easily in the comfortable king-sized bed. If anything, I felt a little guilty about how easy this job was going to be. Tuesday morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the tall windows and spent the day exploring.
The house was larger than I had initially realized. Dozens of rooms, nooks and crannies, a library with books dating back to the 1800s. I found photo albums filled with pictures of the Whitmore family through the decades. Stern-faced men in military uniforms, women in elaborate Victorian dresses, children posed formally in front of Christmas trees. One photo caught my attention, a young woman at the piano, her fingers poised over the keys. The photo was old, maybe from the 1940s, but she looked remarkably similar to Mrs. Whitmore. A sister, perhaps, or a cousin. Something about her expression was melancholy, like she was playing a song that made her sad. I watered the plants according to the schedule, collected the mail, and spent the evening reading in the library. Around 10 p.m., I heard it for the first time, a soft melody drifting from the direction of the living room. Just a few notes, like someone testing keys on a piano. I went to investigate, but the living room was empty. The piano bench was pushed in, the key cover closed. I stood there for a moment listening, but the sound didn't repeat. Mrs. Whitmore had warned me about this, old houses settling, strings vibrating. It made sense, but as I turned to leave, I could have sworn I smelled something. A faint floral scent, like jasmine perfume. Wednesday brought the first real oddity. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard footsteps upstairs. Not the settling of old wood, but actual footsteps, the distinct sound of someone walking across the hardwood floors of the second floor. I grabbed a kitchen knife and slowly climbed the stairs, my heart hammering. The second floor was empty, of course, every room exactly as I'd left it the day before. But in the master bedroom, I found something that made my blood run cold. The window was open. I distinctly remembered closing it the night before. I always slept with windows closed, a habit from my apartment days, but there it was, wide open, the white curtains billowing in the morning breeze. I told myself I must have forgotten, but deep down I knew I hadn't. The piano incident happened Wednesday night. I was in the kitchen following the plant watering schedule when I heard it clearly. Not just random notes, but an actual song. A slow, haunting melody that seemed to drift through the house like smoke. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the living room, and what I saw stopped me cold. The piano was playing by itself. Not dramatically, no keys slamming down, no visible ghostly fingers, just the keys depressing gently, one after another, producing that sad, beautiful melody.
The music was complex, clearly the work of someone skilled, but there was no one there. I stood frozen in the doorway, watching the keys move by themselves, listening to the impossible music. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly, leaving the house in perfect silence. My hands were shaking as I approached the piano. The bench was still pushed in, the key cover still closed over the lower keys, but when I lifted it, the keys were warm to the touch, as if someone had just been playing. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every settling sound had me wide awake and listening. I kept thinking about that photo in the album, the sad woman at the piano. Was this her song? Thursday morning, I called Mrs. Whitmore. I had her contact information for emergencies, and this felt like one. But the call went straight to voicemail. "Hi, Mrs. Whitmore. This is Sarah. I'm having some issues with the house. Could you call me back when you get this? Thanks." She never called back. I spent Thursday trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Player pianos were a thing, right? Maybe the Steinway had some kind of automated system.
But when I examined it closely, I couldn't find any mechanical components. It was just a regular piano. The plant watering kept me busy during the day. Mrs. Whitmore had dozens of plants, and each one had specific requirements. The orchids needed misting, the ferns required filtered water, the succulents just a few drops. It was actually quite soothing caring for these beautiful living things. But as evening approached, I found myself dreading what might happen after dark. I didn't have to wait long. Around 9 p.m., I was reading in the library when I heard something that made my skin crawl. The sound of someone walking around upstairs. Not the gentle footsteps from before, but pacing, back and forth, like someone agitated or upset. I grabbed my phone and crept upstairs, recording everything. The sound was coming from the master bedroom, my bedroom. I could hear it clearly through the door. Step, 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 turn, step, 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 turn. I pressed my ear to the door and the pacing stopped immediately. Complete silence. I opened the door slowly, phone camera ready, but the room was empty. However, something had changed. The photo on the nightstand, a picture of Mrs. Whitmore and her late husband, had been turned face down. I was sure I hadn't touched it. That night, I moved to the guest room. I told myself it was just to try a different bed, but really, I was too scared to sleep in the master bedroom. I locked the door and pushed a chair against it for good measure. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the piano again. This time, the melody was different, more urgent, more desperate. It seemed to be calling to me, drawing me downstairs. I found myself walking toward the living room in my pajamas, like I was being pulled by an invisible string. The music was so beautiful, so sad, that I felt tears in my eyes. Whoever was playing, whatever was playing, was pouring their heart into every note. I reached the living room doorway and gasped. The piano bench was pulled out, and I could see the clear impression of someone sitting on it. The fabric was compressed, the bench slightly angled, as if someone had just stood up. But I was alone in the house. I was sure I was alone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is someone there?" The music stopped instantly. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Eventually, I went back to the guest room and locked the door behind me. Friday was when things got really bad. I woke up to find that every single plant in the house was dead. Not wilted, not drooping, completely dead, as if they'd been drained of life overnight. The orchids were black, the ferns were brown and crispy. Even the hardy succulents were shriveled husks. I stared at the devastation in horror. I'd followed the watering schedule exactly. These plants had been healthy yesterday. How could they all die in one night? I called Mrs. Whitmore again, my voice shaking as I left a message. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is Sarah. Something's wrong with the house. All the plants are dead, and I've been hearing things. Please call me back. I don't think I can stay here anymore." But I needed that $800. I couldn't afford to walk away from the job. I spent the day cleaning up the dead plants, trying to figure out what had happened. The soil was bone dry, as if it had been drained of all moisture. But I'd watered them just yesterday according to the schedule. It didn't make sense. As I was throwing away the last of the dead orchids, I noticed something odd. The basement door was slightly ajar, just a crack, but I was sure it had been closed before. Mrs. Whitmore had been very clear about not going down there. I approached the door cautiously. The basement was dark, but I could hear something. A soft humming, like someone singing quietly to themselves. The same melody I'd heard from the piano. Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider and peered down the stairs. The humming stopped immediately. "Hello?" I called down. "Is someone there?" No response, but I could smell that floral scent again, stronger now. Jasmine. I closed the door and locked it. Whatever was down there, I didn't want to meet it. That night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I sat in the living room with all the lights on, my phone charged and ready to call 911. But who would I call? What would I say? Help? There's a ghost in the house I'm house-sitting? Around midnight, the temperature in the house dropped noticeably. I could see my breath in the air. The lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. In the darkness, I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone taking their time. I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, but when I turned it on, I saw nothing. But I could hear breathing. Soft, feminine breathing, coming from somewhere in the room. "Who are you?" I whispered. "What do you want?" The breathing stopped. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, someone whispered back, "Help me." I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran straight to the guest room and locked a door. I spent the rest of the night huddled under the covers, shaking and crying. Saturday morning, I was packing my bags when I found the letter. It was on the kitchen counter, written in old-fashioned handwriting on expensive stationery. "Sarah, I know you can hear me. I know you can see the signs. I've been trapped in this house for 73 years, and you're the first person who's been able to sense my presence. My name is Margaret Whitmore. I was Eleanor's older sister. I died in this house in 1950, and I've been trying to leave ever since. But something keeps me here, something in the basement. Eleanor knows about me. She's always known. The house sitters aren't just for security, they're to keep me company, to keep me from getting too lonely, too angry. But I don't want company anymore. I want to be free. The thing in the basement, it feeds on life. That's why the plants died. It's been feeding on them and on me for decades, but it's getting stronger. Soon, it won't be satisfied with just plants. Help me end this. Go to the basement, find the source." "Please, I don't want to hurt anyone, but I'm so tired of being trapped. Margaret." I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. This was insane. Ghosts weren't real. But the dead plants, the piano music, the footsteps, how else could I explain it? I tried calling Mrs. Whitmore again, but her phone was disconnected. I tried looking her up online, but found nothing recent. It was like she'd vanished. I had a choice to make. I could leave right now, forfeit the money, and pretend this never happened. Or I could try to help Margaret. The right choice would have been to leave. But something about that letter, about the desperation in those whispered words, made me stay. I spent the day researching the house. What I found made my blood run cold. The Whitmore House had a history. In 1950, Margaret Whitmore had supposedly committed suicide in the basement. The official report said she'd hanged herself, but there were whispers in the local newspaper archives of something more sinister. Strange sounds, unexplained deaths of pets and livestock in the area, reports of people going missing. Then, in 1951, everything stopped. The incidents ceased, and the house became quiet. Until now. I found a photo of Margaret in an old newspaper article. She was the woman from the photo album, the one at the piano. But in the newspaper photo, she looked terrified. The article mentioned that Margaret had been a gifted pianist, and that she'd been engaged to a local man who died in the war. After his death, she'd become reclusive, spending hours playing sad songs on the family piano. Saturday night, I made my decision. I was going to the basement. I waited until after midnight, when the house was at its quietest. I gathered my courage, unlocked the basement door, and started down the stairs. The basement was old, stone walls, low ceiling, dusty and cold. My phone's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing shelves of old mason jars and dusty furniture. But in the far corner, I saw something that made me stop. There was a door, a heavy wooden door with iron hinges, standing slightly ajar. The jasmine scent was strongest here, but underneath it was something else, something rotting and organic. I approached the door slowly. Behind it, I could hear something moving, not footsteps, but something wet and sliding. I pushed the door open. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 feet square. The walls were covered in strange symbols, carved deep into the stone. And in the center of the room was a well, an old stone well that seemed to go down forever. Something was in the well, something that moved in the darkness, something that made sounds like breathing mixed with wind through leaves. And hanging from the ceiling, directly over the well, was a rope, an old frayed rope with a noose at the end. I understood immediately. Margaret hadn't committed suicide. She'd been sacrificed, fed to whatever was in that well, and it had been feeding on her ever since, keeping her trapped, keeping her from finding peace. "Margaret," I whispered, "I'm here. I'm going to help you." The temperature dropped instantly. I could see my breath in the air. And then she appeared. Not fully visible, but there, a shimmering outline of a woman in a 1940s dress, her face pale and drawn. She was beautiful, but her eyes were filled with decades of pain and desperation. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere. "It's been so long since someone believed." The thing in the well stirred, sensing our presence. I could hear it moving, climbing up toward us. Whatever it was big, and it was hungry. "What do I do?" I asked. Margaret pointed to the symbols on the walls. "Break the circle. The symbols, they're a binding spell. Break them and I can leave. But hurry. It's coming." I looked at the carved symbols, then at the well. Something dark was emerging from the depths, something that made my primal hindbrain scream in terror. I found a loose stone on the floor and started attacking the symbols, chipping away at the carved lines. The binding spell was old, but the stone was older. Pieces of the wall crumbled away with each strike. The thing in the well was almost at the surface now. I could see tentacles or arms, slick and black, reaching over the edge. The smell of decay was overwhelming. "Hurry!" Margaret's voice was urgent now. "It's almost free." I struck the final symbol, and the wall cracked. The entire room shuddered, and I heard something like a scream of rage from the well. Margaret's form became brighter, more solid. She looked at me with gratitude and relief. "Thank you," she said. "I can go now. I can finally go." She faded away, and I felt a warmth in the room, like sunlight breaking through clouds. The oppressive weight that had been pressing down on the house lifted. But the thing in the well was still there, still angry, still hungry. I ran up the basement stairs, slammed the door behind me, and kept running until I was outside the house. I got in my car and drove straight to the police station. The cops thought I was crazy, of course, but when they went to check the house, they found the basement door barricaded from the inside, and the well room filled with concrete. Someone had sealed it up, trapping whatever was down there. Mrs. Whitmore never came back from her trip. Her airline confirmed she'd never boarded the flight. When the police searched her apartment, they found a suicide note, dated the day before she'd hired me. She'd known what was going to happen. She'd known Margaret was getting desperate, getting stronger. She'd hired me as a last resort, hoping someone would finally help her sister find peace. I never got paid for that job, but I did get something else. The knowledge that there are things in this world that we don't understand, things that hide in the shadows and the spaces between reality and nightmare. The Whitmore House still stands empty. The city condemned it after the police investigation, but it's still there, waiting. Sometimes, late at night, I drive by it. The windows are boarded up, the yard is overgrown, but it's still there. And sometimes, just sometimes, I can hear piano music drifting from the empty house. But it's different now. Not sad or desperate, but peaceful. Like someone playing a lullaby. I think Margaret found her peace, but I also think some doors, once opened, can never be fully clothed again. I don't take house-sitting jobs anymore. I work at a bank now. Regular hours, fluorescent lights, nothing older than 10 years. It's boring, but it's safe. But every now and then, usually in October, when the leaves are falling and the air has that crisp smell of autumn, I get a call. Someone needs a house sitter, they say. Old house, good pay, just needs someone responsible. I always say no, because I learned something in the Whitmore House, something I'll never forget. Some jobs aren't worth the money, and some houses should stay empty. But I'll tell you this, if you ever find yourself house-sitting in an old house and you hear piano music in the middle of the night, don't ignore it. Don't rationalize it away. Listen to what it's trying to tell you, because sometimes the dead aren't trying to scare you. Sometimes they're trying to warn you, and sometimes they're just trying to ask for help. The night Mom and Dad left me with her. I'm 12 now, but this happened when I was 8. I still sleep with my bedroom door open, and I still check the locks on all the windows before bed. My parents think I'm just being paranoid, but they don't know what really happened that night. They don't know about Miss Claire and what she did when they weren't home. My name is Danny, and I live in Cedar Falls with my mom and dad. It's one of those small towns where everyone knows everyone and nothing exciting ever happens. My parents both work at the hospital. Mom's a nurse and dad's a paramedic, so they have to work weird shifts sometimes. Usually my grandma watches me when they're both working, but that Saturday night in October, she was sick with the flu. That's how we ended up with Miss Claire. I'd never seen her before, but Mom said she came highly recommended from the babysitting service. She was probably in her 20s, with long blonde hair and this smile that seemed too big for her face. When she showed up at our door at 6 o'clock, she was carrying this old leather bag that looked like something a doctor might use. "You must be Danny," she said, crouching down to my level. "I've heard so much about you." I remember thinking that was weird because my mom had only called the babysitting service that morning. How could this lady have heard much about me? Mom and Dad were in a hurry. They were both pulling double shifts and needed to get to the hospital. Dad gave me his usual warnings about being good and not staying up too late, while Mom showed Miss Claire where everything was in the kitchen. "Danny's dinner is in the fridge," Mom said, rushing around gathering her things. "He can have one snack after dinner, and bedtime is 8:30. His pajamas are laid out on his bed." Miss Claire nodded and smiled that too big smile. "Don't worry about a thing, Mrs. Peterson. Danny and I are gonna have so much fun together." The way she said fun made something twist in my stomach, but I couldn't figure out why. After my parents left, Miss Claire turned to me with that same unsettling smile. "Well, Danny, what would you like to do first?" "Can we watch TV?" I asked. I was hoping to catch the Saturday night cartoons.
"Oh, I have something much better than television," she said, opening her leather bag. "I brought some games." She pulled out what looked like a board game, but it wasn't like any game I'd ever seen. The box was old and worn, with strange symbols carved into the wood instead of printed letters. When she opened it, I saw that instead of a normal game board, there were these weird circular patterns with more symbols around the edges. "What kind of game is it?" I asked. "It's called hide and seek," she said. "But it's not the kind of hide and seek you're used to. This is much more interesting." She started arranging pieces on the board, little figurines that looked like people, but their faces were all wrong. Too many eyes, or mouths that opened too wide, or limbs that bent in directions that hurt to look at. "I don't think I want to play that," I said, backing away from the coffee table. Miss Claire's smile faltered for just a second, and I saw something dark flash in her eyes. "Oh, but Danny, we have to play. That's why I'm here." "I thought you were here to babysit me." "I am," she said, setting up more pieces. "But babysitting is just another word for watching, isn't it? And I've been watching you for a very long time." That made my skin crawl. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know all about you, Danny Peterson. I know you're afraid of the dark. I know you check your closet 3 times before bed. I know you have nightmares about the monster under your bed." "I'd never told anyone about the monster under my bed, not even my parents. How could she possibly know?" "I want to call my mom," I said. "Your mom is very busy right now," Miss Claire said, still arranging her creepy game pieces. "She's helping sick people. We don't want to bother her, do we?" She was right. Mom had told me never to call her at work unless it was a real emergency, and technically nothing bad had happened. Miss Claire was just being weird. "How about we have dinner first?" I suggested, hoping to change the subject. "Excellent idea," she said, packing up the game. "I'll heat up your food." I followed her into the kitchen, staying close enough to watch what she was doing, but far enough away that she couldn't grab me if she tried.
She pulled a container of spaghetti and meatballs out of the fridge and put it in the microwave. While we waited for the food to heat up, she started asking me questions. "Tell me about your dreams, Danny." "My dreams?" "Yes. What do you dream about at night?" I didn't want to tell her, but something about the way she was looking at me made it hard to lie. "Sometimes I dream about being chased." "Chased by what?" "I don't know. Something dark. Something that wants to hurt me." Her smile got wider. "And where do you go when you're being chased?" "I try to hide, but it always finds me." "Always?" I nodded, feeling sick to my stomach. Why was I telling her this? Why couldn't I stop talking? The microwave beeped, and Miss Claire pulled out my dinner. but when she set it in front of me, I saw that she'd done something to it. The spaghetti was arranged in those same circular patterns from her game, and the meatballs were positioned at specific points around the edge. "I'm not hungry," I said. "You have to eat, Danny. You need your strength for tonight." "Strength for what?" "For the game, of course. We're going to play whether you want to or not." I pushed the plate away. "I don't want to play your stupid game." That's when Miss Claire's whole demeanor changed. The fake sweetness disappeared and her voice became cold and sharp. "Listen to me very carefully, Danny. I'm not really a babysitter. I'm here for a very specific reason, and you're going to help me whether you like it or not." "What do you want?" "I want to go home," she said, "and you're going to help me get there." "I don't understand." She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, her eyes never leaving mine. "There are places, Danny. Places that exist alongside our world, but separate from it. Dark places, where things like me come from. I've been trapped here for a very long time, and I need someone young and pure to help me open the door back." I was 8 years old, but I wasn't stupid. I knew she was talking about something bad, something that would hurt me. "I want my mom and dad," I said. "Your mom and dad can't help you now. They're at the hospital, remember? Far away. And they won't be back until very late." She was right. They'd both be working until at least midnight, maybe later.
And I'd left my phone upstairs in my room. "What's going to happen to me?" I asked. "Well, that depends on how cooperative you are," Ms. Claire said. "If you help me willingly, it will be much easier. But if you fight me, well, the process can be quite unpleasant." I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted from the kitchen, running toward the front door. But when I grabbed the handle and tried to turn it, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked, and I couldn't reach the deadbolt. "Danny," Miss Claire called from the kitchen, her voice sing-song and terrible, "running away is cheating, and I don't like cheaters." I ran upstairs to my room and slammed the door, locking it behind me. Then I grabbed my phone and tried to call my mom, but there was no signal. The phone showed full bars, but when I dialed, nothing happened. I tried the landline in my parents' room. Dead silence. That's when I heard Miss Claire's footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed to echo more than they should. "Danny," she called, "come out. Come out wherever you are." I ran to my bedroom window and tried to open it, but it was painted shut. I'd never noticed that before. I tried the window in my parents' room, then the bathroom window. All of them were sealed tight. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs. "You're only making this harder on yourself, Danny. The longer you hide, the more it's going to hurt." I crept back to my room and hid in the closet, pulling the door shut behind me. I crouched in the darkness among my clothes and shoes, trying to control my breathing. Maybe if I was quiet enough, she wouldn't find me. But then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Miss Claire was humming. It was a lullaby, but wrong somehow. The melody was familiar, but the notes were all twisted and dark. "Rock-a-bye, Danny, in the treetop," she sang softly. "When the wind blows, the cradle will rock." Her voice was getting closer. "When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall." She was right outside my bedroom door now. "And down will come Danny, cradle and all." The door opened with a creak. I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from making any sound. Through the slats in the closet door, I could see Miss Claire standing in my doorway. but she looked different now, taller. And her shadow on the wall behind her was all wrong. It had too many arms, and they were reaching out like they were trying to grab something. "I know you're in here, Danny," she said. "I can smell your fear. It's delicious." She walked slowly around my room, checking under the bed, behind the curtains, in the toy chest. I watched her shadow moving on the wall, and I realized that whatever Miss Claire really was, she wasn't human. "You know, Danny," she said as she searched, "I've been doing this for a very long time, decades, maybe longer. And I've learned that children always hide in the same places. Under beds, behind curtains, in closets." She stopped directly in front of my closet door. "The thing is, hiding only works if the seeker is playing fair. But I never said I was going to play fair." The closet door flew open, and Miss Claire reached in with arms that were definitely too long and fingers that were definitely too sharp. She grabbed me by the shirt and pulled me out into the room. "Found you," she said, and her smile was full of teeth that hadn't been there before. She dragged me downstairs, and I saw that she'd been busy while I was hiding. The living room had been completely rearranged. The furniture was pushed against the walls, and that weird game board was set up in the center of the room, but now it was huge, big enough for a person to stand on. "The game is very simple, Danny," she said, forcing me to sit on the couch. "You stand in the center of the board, and I perform a little ritual. It will hurt quite a bit, but it will be over quickly." "What kind of ritual?" "The kind that opens doors. The kind that lets things like me go home." She knelt down in front of me, and I could see that her eyes were completely black now. "The kind that requires a sacrifice." I tried to run again, but she grabbed my arm with those impossibly long fingers. Her grip was like ice, and where she touched me, my skin started to burn. "Please," I said, "I'm just a kid. I didn't do anything wrong." "Oh, Danny," she said, tilting her head at an angle that was too extreme for a human neck. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're just unlucky." She started to drag me toward the game board, and I knew that if I stepped on it, I was never going to step off. I was going to end up like all the other kids she'd probably done this to. All the other kids whose parents had hired her thinking she was just a normal babysitter. That's when I remembered something my dad had taught me about his job as a paramedic. He told me that in emergency situations, you have to think fast and use whatever you have available. You can't wait for the perfect solution. You have to make do with what's around you. I looked around the room desperately. Miss Claire's leather bag was sitting on the coffee table, still open, and inside it, I could see something that gave me an idea. "Wait," I said. "I have a question about the game." Miss Claire paused, looking amused. "What kind of question?" "If I have to stand on the board, where do you stand?" "I stand around the edge and perform the ritual." "But what if someone else came to play? What if there were more people?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if my parents came home early? What if they wanted to play too?" Miss Claire's grip on my arm loosened slightly. "Your parents aren't coming home." "But what if they did? Would the game still work?" "The game requires only one sacrifice," she said slowly. "Additional players would be problematic." "What about you?" I asked. "What happens to you if someone interrupts the game?" She hesitated, and I saw uncertainty in her black eyes for the first time. "I would be sent back without completing the ritual." I would be trapped between worlds. That sounds bad. It would be very bad, she admitted. While she was distracted, I lunged for her bag and grabbed the first thing my hand touched. It was a small glass vial filled with some kind of dark liquid. "What are you doing?" Miss Claire shrieked, her voice becoming less human by the second. "I'm playing the game," I said, and I threw the vial as hard as I could at the center of the game board. The glass shattered, and the liquid spread across the strange symbols. Immediately, the room filled with a sound like screaming wind, and the temperature dropped about 20 degrees. Miss Claire let out a howl of rage that definitely didn't come from a human throat. "You don't know what you've done!"
"I know exactly what I've done," I said, backing away from her. "I've interrupted your stupid game." The board began to glow with a sickly green light, and the symbols started moving, rearranging themselves into new patterns. Miss Claire's form began to flicker like a TV with bad reception. "You've doomed us both," she screamed. "The ritual is incomplete. I can't go home and I can't stay here." "Good," I said. But then I realized she was right about one thing. I had doomed us both. Because as the ritual collapsed, I could feel something pulling at me, like a strong wind, trying to drag me toward the glowing board. Miss Claire was being pulled toward it too, but she was fighting it, her fingers extending into claws as she tried to grab onto something solid. "If I can't go home," she snarled, "then I'm taking you with me." She lunged for me, but I was ready. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, one of my mom's medical textbooks from the coffee table, and threw it at her. It passed right through her flickering form and hit the wall behind her. She was already more ghost than person now, being pulled inexorably toward the collapsing ritual. But her claws were still solid enough to hurt, and they were reaching for me. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, a car door slamming in the driveway. "Danny?" My dad's voice calling from outside. "We're home." The front door opened, and my parents walked in just as Miss Claire made one final desperate grab for me. Her claws passed through my chest, and I felt a cold so intense it was like being stabbed with icicles. "What the?" my dad started to say, but his words were cut off as Miss Claire let out one final shriek and was sucked into the collapsing game board. The green light flared once blindingly bright, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. My parents were sitting beside my bed, and they looked like they'd been crying. "Danny?" my mom said when she saw my eyes open. "Sweetheart, how do you feel?" "Where's Miss Claire?" I asked. My parents exchanged a look. "Honey," my dad said gently, "there was no Miss Claire. When we got home, you were unconscious in the living room. The furniture was all moved around and there was broken glass everywhere." "But she was there," I insisted. "She tried to hurt me. She had this game. The doctors think you might have had some kind of seizure," my mom said. "Sometimes that can cause hallucinations. Very vivid ones." "It wasn't a hallucination," I said. "Call the babysitting service. They'll tell you about Miss Claire." My dad looked uncomfortable. "Danny, we never called a babysitting service. We were supposed to work late, but Grandma called and said she was feeling better, so we came home early to pick you up and take you to her house." "But you left me with her. You said goodbye and everything." "Sweetie, we never left you alone. We were getting ready to leave when we found you unconscious." I sat up in the hospital bed, my head spinning. "What time is it?" "It's 7:30, my mom said. "Saturday night." But that was impossible. I'd been with Miss Claire for hours. We'd had dinner, played her terrible game. I'd hidden in the closet. It had to have been at least midnight. "I want to go home," I said. "The doctors want to keep you overnight for observation," my dad said, "but we can go home tomorrow morning." The next day, when we got back to the house, I ran straight to the living room. Everything was back in its normal place. The coffee table was where it belonged, the couch was against the wall, and there was no sign of Miss Claire's game board. But when I looked closely at the floor in the center of the room, I could see scorch marks on the carpet, circular patterns that looked suspiciously like the symbols from Miss Claire's game. "Mom?" I called. "What happened to the carpet?" She came into the living room and looked where I was pointing. "I don't know, honey. It was like that when we got home. We'll have to get it replaced." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had it all been a hallucination, a seizure-induced nightmare? Or had something know for sure? But I do know this. I never sleep with my bedroom door closed anymore. And I never ever play games with strangers. Because sometimes the people who say they're there to take care of you are actually there to take something from you. And sometimes the only way to win is to break the rules. 3 months later, I was reading the newspaper with my dad when I saw a small article buried on page 7. It was about a string of disappearances in towns across the state. Children who had vanished while their parents were at work, leaving behind only confused babysitters who claimed to have no memory of what happened. The babysitters all had the same description: young women with blonde hair and smiles that seemed too big for their faces. They'd all been hired through various babysitting services, but when the police investigated, they found that none of these women had ever actually worked for those services. They'd simply shown up at the right place at the right time, as if they'd known exactly when and where they'd be needed. I showed the article to my parents, but they just said it was a coincidence. They still think what happened to me was medical, not supernatural. But I know better. I know that Miss Claire is still out there, still looking for a way home. And I know that somewhere, maybe in another town, another family is getting ready to go to work thinking they're leaving their child with a nice young babysitter who comes highly recommended. I just hope that when it happens, that kid is smarter than I was. I hope they don't trust the too big smile or the old leather bag full of impossible games. And I hope they remember that sometimes the only way to win is to break the rules before the rules break you. Because in the end, that's what saved me. Not following the rules of Miss Claire's game, but breaking them so completely that the game destroyed itself. And hopefully it destroyed her too. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed with my door open and the hallway light on, I sometimes wonder if she's still out there looking for another child to play her game with. And I wonder if next time she'll be ready for someone who fights back. I'm 12 now, and I still check the locks on all the windows before bed. Because you never know when someone might be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to knock on your door with a too big smile and a leather bag full of nightmares. And you never know when your parents might answer thinking they're letting in help, but actually letting in something much, much worse.